Abolition is for Everybody is a podcast that tackles the sometimes difficult conversations around prison abolition.
I'm Ra.
And I'm Taina.
And I'm Lee.
We're excited to talk about the possibilities and realities of abolition in today's world with you. Join us for a friendly talk, sometimes with guest experts. Just a reminder, friends, in this episode and every episode, we talk about very sensitive and often personal issues. Take care of you.
Today, we're joined by guest Professor Oscar Soto, who's a Chicano scholar, activist, and prison abolitionist. His work centers on systemic change, and he works closely with prison abolitionist communities and communities that want to see an end to global capitalism. He holds two positions, one as a lecturer at Cal State University San Marcos' Sociology, Criminology, and Justice Studies, and a teaching associate at the University of California in Santa Barbara Sociology. Professor Soto, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have this conversation with you. There are so many subjects that relate to prison abolition and, a place I think it's really important to start. Why so many folks end up in prison in the first place, and the school to prison pipeline is a really important subject to dive into. So before we get into the conversation, we thought it might be cool if you could talk to us a little bit about what the term school to prison pipeline means to you. And, when we say that, what are we referring to?
Well, when you talk about the school to prison pipeline, there's different scholars that kind of title it or kind of have different terms for it. But for a scholar like myself that believes in revolution and believes in systemic change and abolition, it's basically criminalizing poor communities. That's how I see it. Because in reality, when we really think about it, what's happening is that we have different systems of social control. We have policing, we have immigrant detention centers, we have prisons, and we have gang injunctions, which in San Diego and LA is very heightened. So these are different systems of social control that actually criminalize a certain population. And when I mean a certain population, we mean Black, brown, and poor white communities. So these systems of social control for me are systems that I'm a big critic of capitalism, global capitalism. And I for one, I critique global capitalism and see systems as what they call as a dialectic system that they're related to everything else. Everything's related to everything else. So gang injunctions, the school to prison pipeline, policing, they're all related and they're all interconnected to this massive system of global capitalism. And what we mean by global capitalism is a system of profits.
Right.
So how do you make massive amount of profits? So the prison industrial complex is a system of massive profits. So you have big corporations coming in, trying to invest in the enslavement of poor people. So what I'm really getting at it here is that the systems of social control, which is in this episode, we're talking about the school to prison pipeline, is a system of pushing out poor communities, poor people out of the school system. You don't see the school to prison pipeline in Beverly Hills, in San Diego, the rich area, and my areas, La Jolla, Carlsbad. You don't see the school to prison pipeline in these institutions, but you do see police protecting the investment of the rich.
Yeah, Professor, when you talk about pushing them out, can you just break that down a little bit more? Because I think that's a huge and key point to the actual process of the school to prison pipeline, right? In these lower economic communities or the lower class communities, as society would necessarily deem them, when they're pushing them out, can you just break that down just a little bit more?
Right. So when I talk about the school to prison pipeline and these communities being pushed out, is that when you talk about schools in these old communities, there's a lack of resources.
Yeah.
There's, instead of having counselors, you have police officers or security, you have metal detectors, you have actual schools that look like prisons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So ideologically, people are already seeing the school as a prison. A lot of
a place of confinement.
Especially when in North County, San Diego, where I grew up, there's a lot of low-income communities. So in these low-income communities, you have Escondido, you have Vista, you have so this is North County, San Diego. I'm describing North County, San Diego. And I call it North County, San Diego because when you talk about San Diego, people would like to kind of make it look kind of appealing. So it's a military town. Oh, beautiful beaches.
Yeah.
But when we talk about North County, San Diego, that's different. We have gang injunctions. We have poor communities. We have ICE. We have the majority of immigrant communities are in North County, San Diego. So these are poor communities, and we call it as racialized communities because it's mainly composed of Black and brown. So this is the process that I'm talking about. In these schools, you have, again, officers that criminalize a certain population, which is mainly black and brown youth, right? You have already an idea. What I mean by ideology, an idea of who a criminal is. Every time I start my classes, I always start my classes I always sit in the middle of the class, and I dress like this. Like I don't know if you can see it through the podcast, but I'm tatted up, I'm sleeved up, I wear my hat, I look like a homeboy, right? Because I've dressed like this my whole life. So I sit in the middle of my class, wait for all the students to come in, and then 5 minutes pass, and everybody's like, "Where's the professor? Where's the professor? Where's he at? Man, I'm about to leave this class. Fuck this class. If he's gonna be late all the time, then why come to the class, right?" I've heard like people say this to me.
Yeah.
And then I just get up, boom, write my name on the board. My name is Professor Soto. I'm your professor. And a lot of the students go, "Oh shit," or "fuck." I even hear people cuss like, "Fuck, this is our professor." But ideologically, we're thinking he can't be a professor. He should be in prison.
Automatically, you shake that belief that is like the implicit bias that has like been instilled in us as we're growing up.
Exactly. So ideologically, when we look at the school to prison pipeline, there's already like counselors, the police officers already have an idea of what students to criminalize, what students are going to be the bad apples, what students are going to be the bad students, right? So we tend to criminalize them. And again, a lot of the students are coming from poor racialized communities. And a lot of times also too, like with the lack of resources, a lot of the students have no resources. They go home, they lack internet. So a lot of the time people are like, "Oh, well, they're just lazy. They don't want to do their homework." But in reality, there's some folks that really do want to put their effort into education, but lack the resources to get higher education or education. And so,
Right. And for me, when I think about the school to prison pipeline, it's a few different things, right? It's like the culture of, criminalizing Black and brown youth, poor youth, creating the idea of what a, quote unquote, like troublemaker is. Usually, a Black or brown boy who might be like precocious or, speak out in another way. And instead of, that being perceived as like intelligence or creativity, it's like, okay, you are defiant and we are going to criminalize you in different ways. So like one, it's like the concepts and the culture of like who is a quote unquote criminal. And two, it's the structures, which you also spoke about, Professor Soto, which looks like, schools essentially having cages around them, chain link fences around the school. It looks like having metal detectors. It looks like having police officers. Folks know I'm from Los Angeles. So I'm a product of the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is the only school district in the country that has its own police department. So it's not LAPD. It's not the LA County Sheriffs. It's their own institution of police. They have different police cars, different uniforms that are set up just to police our school system. So when you think about like the structure in place and the culture and like the way that things are just like punitive in school, just think about like what we call things, right? Like if you get in trouble at school, what happens? You get put in detention, which is, what we call jails and prisons are detention centers. You get punished for wrongdoing. You don't get, encouraged to do anything different. And often a lot of the punishments actually like make it more difficult for you to learn, like suspensions never have made sense. Like if you're so concerned about my education, why would a consequence of misbehavior be suspension and me like not having the opportunity to go to school and get my education? And I think that, these are areas that instill in our youth, like from a very young age, the things about you that are different or are wrong, are criminal. So we start, to see ourselves in that way. And, we start to just accept punishment as the norm. And that happens like, very, very early on. So yeah, it's the culture, it's the structures. And I know like Lee, I'd really be interested to hear like what your views are on, what the school to prison pipeline looks like to you.
Yeah, I mean, y'all are like laying it out like very clear, and it really does, like it covers all of those, I guess, qualities of human nature, whether folks are poor or whether, you're a person of color, the area that you grow up in, having police kind of patrol the blocks and the areas, you get tickets in the hallways if you're like late for school or whatever. Me personally, like I moved so many times growing up and went to so many schools, like it was already like destined for me. Like all of the males in my family had gone to prison, and the school, the teachers, they weren't supportive. Like, I was already labeled a bad apple just because I had the same last name as, my other family members. And it was kind of already like predestined for them in their eyes. Like, this is the path that you're on, and this is where you're going to end up. And these are the reasons why. Professor Soto was talking about, like, I never had a counselor call me in. I never had like a teacher hold me back after class and ask me like, hey, how's things going? Like, right. I saw you come in with a black eye or, a bruised lip today or something like this. Is everything good? Like, it just didn't happen. And I know, like, when I went to prison, I ended up spending 25 years inside. And when I went to prison, like, the folks in there, we started really delving into our personal biases and our personal ideologies, even our self-efficacy of whether or not that we could actually even accomplish some type of education or if that was an alternative route for us in our lives. And most of the folks inside will tell you to a T, like, growing up in the neighborhood or growing up in the school district that I was in or whatever, it wasn't cultivated like a healing community or a helping community. It was cultivated into, like, we're going to separate you from the ones that we feel like have potential, right? And I know that there's been like talk about like at-risk youth, and then there's at-promise youth, right? And I think that's a huge difference. And even just that one label on how you see folks and how you actually engage with them, because if you feel like somebody is at promise, then you're going to try to cultivate that. You're going to try to assist that. You're going to try to move that forward within that person. But if you look at them as at risk, you're going to try to keep them at bay. You're going to try to keep them in line. You're going to try to keep them like away from the other kids in your lives. And Taina, you mentioned something that was really interesting to me about like your dealing with the police mentality within school. How did that affect you and your learning, and how you kind of like, how did you navigate that as you pushed forward through school? And I'm sure Professor Soto can like obviously talk about it and from his perspective too, because like there is a way through it, but how do you get through it?
Right. So I'll say similar to you, Lee, like my school experience was kind of a mixed bag. I transferred to different schools quite often. And my mom was, one of those moms who would lie about our address so that we could go to a school in a different area. Right. Her understanding was the understanding of a lot of parents that the schools that were in our communities were not as, quote, good. And she wanted us to get a good education. So when I was at those schools that tend to be more white and more affluent, I generally had like a really good learning experience. I was seen as a gifted and precocious child, and stop. And I got good grades and I excelled. But it got to a point, especially in my high school experience, that I wanted to go to school in my community. Like I felt, I was different from the other kids there because my background was different. So I wanted to go to school in my community, and there it was, complete like night and day experience. Where I went to high school, it was very heavily policed. In the 9th grade, I ended up getting a truancy ticket because I was 20 minutes late to school. And why was I 20 minutes late to school? Poverty. My school was far away. I had to take the bus. The bus only ran once an hour, which meant every day I was either 40 minutes early to school or 20 minutes late to school. So that day I was 20 minutes late. And the way that it was set up was the cops just waited outside the school gates, and everybody who was late was told to go into an office. We weren't told why. We had to sit there for about 20, 30 minutes. We were told to sign some papers, and then we were allowed to go back to class. I had no idea in the whole process what was going on. A couple weeks later, I get a ticket in the mail for being truant. And my mom was like, why were you ditching school? And I was like, I was not. I was late. And what ended up happening there was we got fined $250.
Ridiculous.
I had to miss school to go to court. Again, you care about my education so much, you're forcing me to miss school. And, our family wasn't able to pay. So for that reason, I was not able to get my driver's license until I turned 18. And then in addition to that, the following year in the 10th grade, the only time I've ever been in handcuffs in my life was in school. I had a teacher who called the school police on me for, quote, violating the dress code. I was wearing a shirt that showed maybe about half an inch of my midriff, and it was such an egregious crime that he called the school police, and they escorted me out in handcuffs. And, I have to ask myself, like, what lesson are you trying to teach here? Why, was I being criminalized for something like that? Because, of course, the gender aspect to that as well. But, like what you were saying, Lee, I was going through a lot of things growing up. My dad was in and out of jail. Both of my parents were addicted to drugs and alcohol. We were homeless for a lot of my life. I had to start working at age 14 to, support myself and my siblings. And I was depressed. Like I spent like pretty much my whole 9th grade year not going to school. I would just like go to a park or the library or something, and I didn't want to go to school. And at no point did a counselor reach out and say, hey, you've missed a lot of school. Is everything okay? I would get in trouble for missing school. But yeah, that's been a little bit about my experience. And I'm grateful that like personally, I didn't get pushed into prison or jail. But it was clear to me that my school system saw me as, like as a criminal in some way. But Professor Soto, I know like that you had also shared that you're formerly incarcerated. So yeah, I guess, same question to you. Like, how do you feel this system of the school to prison pipeline had an impact on your life?
Right. So first of all, I want to unpack some of the stuff that we've been talking about. I want to talk about the relationship between the school to prison pipeline and policy. A lot of people see the school to prison pipeline as an isolated and say, oh, it just happens in schools. But in reality, what happens is that policies are made in the schools in order to criminalize a certain population, in order to push people out of the school to prison pipeline. And like you were talking about, there's a zero tolerance policy. A student fell asleep in the class, zero tolerance, go to the principal's office, you get detention. Students are playing, I used to have those little diamond papers that I used to play like football.
Yeah. I bet you was a good kicker too.
For that. Go to the principal's office, you got detention for a week. Playing with paper clips, with the rubber band. So minute and stuff that like kids do really criminalize them, and certain populations get criminalized. Other people are like, oh no, boys will be boys, girls will be girls. Oh, they're just kids, right? But when you're talking about a certain population, and ideologically, I'm thinking about Black and brown poor communities, right? Oh, he's going to be a bad student. He's going to be a bad apple. He's going to end up in prison, right? And that's the ideology that we need to get rid of. Like we need to revolutionize the way we think, but also the material world. We need to shy away from this capitalist system. So that's one of the things, the zero tolerance policy I wanted to highlight. We need to get rid of the zero tolerance policies. And you pointed out something also too that's very important, that there's a lot of people that see different schools more prestigious than others. And a lot of the parents, they're like, we need to get an education. I need to get my son, daughter into these schools in order for them to get out of what they call it. I don't like using the word ghetto. I like to use the word barrio, like barrio, because it means a lot to us when we talk about our barrio. It's very dear to us, and so a lot of parents want to get their students into these prestigious schools because it will get their students more prestigious schools, more prestigious colleges. But when we try to do that, when we try to get an education, right, we're criminalized. I remember here in North County, San Diego, one of the parents tried to get their student, they lied about their address, right? And try to get their student into one of the more prestigious schools. The parent got 2 years in prison for doing that. And in reality, when we're trying to do what they call upper mobility, we also get criminalized. And another thing, finally, what I want to highlight is that criminalization, a lot of people think the school to prison pipeline is high school and to prison, high school to prison. But criminalization happens at a very young age. I remember when I was in first, second grade, I was already in the principal's office for the whole year just because I identified with the student. And we were fighting because we were fighting over a bond. And this label from second grade followed me all the way to high school. I was in
They're coming for you right now.
I'm already being policed here.
Right?
I'm talking shit about the sheriffs.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the sheriffs live right next to me. So
Perfect.
So I'm already being criminalized at such a young age, right? And the impact that it had on me, I took what they call remedial classes. So all the way from middle school through high school, I took what they call special ed classes. Every week, they just put Disney movies on us. We had to learn cursive. And a lot of my peers were just brown people. You didn't see any white folks. Because again, where I'm from is very prestigious. There's a lot of farming. It's a valley center. So it's a farming industry. There's a lot of immigrant communities. So there's a lot of exploitation, but there's a lot of rich folk, right? So again, this label from second grade followed me all the way to high school. I started seeing my homeboys going into what they call continuation school. If nobody knows what continuation school is, basically a school, a high school where you can get credits that you've fallen behind of. You can get them at a faster track, right? So a lot of my homeboys were going to continuation school because a lot of the times, even the curriculum is kind of like pushing away students. In your history books, in high school, middle school, you don't see your raza, you don't see your people, you don't see the Chicano movement, you don't see the Black Panther Party, you don't see the Black Liberation, you don't see the Civil Rights Movement, you don't see the movement against the War of Vietnam. I did a study and I saw only about 12 pages in a 400 book history book about our people. And mainly was criminalizing our community, how the Native Americans were conquered, right? And they didn't say they were killed and murdered. It was like, oh, it was a free land for people without a land, right? So I wanted to highlight the curriculum because that's another aspect that pushes our community out. We're going to lose interest if we don't see our community. If we see our community as being murdered, if we see our community as being labeled as criminal, of course we're going to lose interest. But also too, that affected me I got incarcerated after I graduated high school. I didn't see myself going to college. A lot of the counselors in my community, they would see a person like me, oh, you want to take PE classes, you want to take weightlifting, they would never inform you about college. I didn't even know what college was until I graduated after high school. I'm like, what the fuck is college?
Right.
And not knowing that there was a college right like 2 blocks off my street. Right. So a lot of the time, the system, and I'm talking about like the counselors, is complacent in pushing us out of the educational system. I mean, I say the educational system did save me because after my incarceration, I did get an education. Now I'm getting my PhD. Right. So that's one of the ways that it affected me personally. But there's a lot of aspects to the school to prison pipeline. I could spend a whole semester just talking about the school to prison pipeline and the different aspects that it has in criminalizing, again, poor communities.
Yeah, when I was going through school, and I would be curious to hear, my instructors looked like my aunts and uncles, right? Did they look like your aunts and uncles when you all were going through like, your school and your tutelage, or did they look like my aunts and uncles? And did they not like relate to the community that they were actually teaching?
That's a great question. And now that I'm reflecting on it, no, most of my teachers were white. They were not folks of color. And I don't think that they were from the communities that they were teaching in.
Yeah, to back that, none of my teachers were from my community. And now that I look at it, I have homeboys that are teachers here. I'm like, man, I would have benefited way more if you were my professor or you were my teacher growing up in this community now. Because again, my community now has been transformed into more Latino, what they call Latinx communities. So now there's more teachers, more professors teaching that look like us. And even like the simple thing as a tattoo, it's more accepted now.
Yeah.
Back then, you get a tattoo, you criminal, oh, he's a cholo, right? Even from our own community, oh, va a ser cholo, or he's going to be a cholo when he grows up, right? But now the culture has changed so much and we've been educating ourselves so much that a lot of stuff has been more accepted.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's like, so for me personally, like, and thank you so much, Professor, for sharing all of this wisdom and dropping these nuggets on us, because it's really helpful for people to understand. And, as we continue, the three of us to share parts of our lives, I think it's really important to see the intersections of how all of this kind of come into play and how they manifest within our lives. And it kind of steers us down certain paths, or we have certain journeys to go. While I was inside, it was, I had dropped out of school in 9th grade. I had enough of it. I wasn't going to do it anymore. I ended up making a series of bad choices, and I was arrested at the age of 17. I ended up being sentenced to life without parole plus 17 years. And so I spent the next 25 years inside. And what I did is I started pursuing education. But the interesting part is I started learning from my peers, and my peers looked like me, or they at least were from the community that I was from. And so I learned better from them, right? I was able to grasp and understand and relate to them. And it wasn't until like later that I started doing like a lot of talking about my traumas that I had gone through, talking about the environment that I grew up in, talking about like the things that I had done to harm other people, and marrying that. And I've talked about this a little bit with some of my colleagues, and marrying that with higher education, my inner education and higher education. When I really brought that together, that's when I started to like, everything started to like really click for me. And I started to understand not only the power of higher education, but the power of inner education and how that will like release me from these tethers that had held me back for so long, thinking, that low self-esteem, that low self-efficacy, that I didn't have like the belief in myself that I could do these things, that I was capable, that I was worthy, that I was loved. And so all of these things really started to be demystified within myself. Like, hey, or they've been like debunked within myself of like, hey, like you can do this and you can make a difference, achieve the things that these like things that were sitting on clouds almost for us, right? These colleges or these, high paying jobs or these positions of authority within our communities that had the influence with folks. And so I think having that like experience for me personally was like the jumping off or the catalyst or the straw that broke the camel's back that propelled me to change my life and to start to like mentor and change the lives around me. And I think that's like our intersections, you, Taina, and obviously you, Professor Soto, like where our stuff kind of comes to a head of where we've changed something within our lives to be able to be that positive influence within our communities.
Yeah. And, speaking of that, Lee, like I also have some experience on the other end of it. I was a middle school teacher for a year in Oakland, and I taught special education students. So 6th, 7th, and 8th, all of my students were Black or Latinx. They were all low income. And the way that I was instructed as a teacher was essentially to criminalize them. There was one student in particular who I was warned about before the school year even started. They were like, oh, he's a troublemaker. He talks back, this, and that. He'll probably spend the whole year in the principal's office. And this is what I was told before I'd even met this kid. He was hilarious and he was, kind of like a pain to deal with sometimes, but he was a hurt kid. His dad was incarcerated. His, mom was like struggling to do the best that she could as a single mom. And yeah, like he would get on my nerves and disrupt learning like for the rest of the kids. But every time like he would act out, I'd be like, okay, let's go talk outside. And I would pull him outside and we would have a conversation and, I'd bring him back in and he would be fine. Like as a teacher, I really wanted to like push back against the school to prison pipeline, like as hard as I could, even though I was operating within that system. I had another who was chronically absent. And I could relate to that because, that was my experience in the 9th grade because I was going through some rough things. That's when, my dad was in jail. And I asked him, why is he absent so much? And I ended up finding out that he had a strained relationship with his father. Dad was deported. They finally started rebuilding, and then his dad abruptly passed away. And that his mom was just diagnosed with brain cancer. So he was depressed, and he didn't want to go to school. And, one day I was told by the administration at the school that I had to report his family to the district attorney because he was absent so much. So what I ended up doing was pulling up to his house instead and being like, hey, you need to bring your butt to school because they're telling me to call the cops on you, and I don't want to do that. And I had to like collude with the attendance administrator at the school, like where we faked his attendance records so that I wouldn't, be forced into calling the district attorneys and like reporting his family. And, and then I was just thinking how I was set up for failure as a teacher. I was 23 years old when I was teaching this class. I had no training in special education. I had no training in writing IEPs, which are their individualized education program. And I had no textbooks, no budget for my classroom, no curriculum. And it's 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who are at like the reading of math levels varying from like kindergarten to 4th grade. So I'm just supposed to teach all of these kids different level with a very limited understanding of like how to accommodate their learning disabilities. Like all of that is a recipe for disaster. And then we wonder why, kids end up dropping out of school, or even if they graduate, not really finding a lot of success because we are setting them up for failure. So, even someone like me on the other end who is trying really hard not to push kids out into the criminal legal system, there were just so many things that were outside of my control. And actually, so this was going on 10 years ago that I was a teacher. I got a call from, that same student who I was warned about a couple months ago. And he told me, he got in trouble. He got arrested. Is there anybody who I can connect him with to help him fight his case? So, I was doing my best to support him, but I just felt like so overwhelmingly sad knowing that like this entire system has failed him and that he is one of like millions of, kids across this country who are being pushed into the incarceration system.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really do critique about the school system is that they care more. They see students, and that's why I tie it to capitalism. They see students as money makers. You miss class, they're losing money.
Right.
So instead of addressing the trauma that's going on at home, addressing the trauma of someone's father being incarcerated, someone's mother being incarcerated. There's actually higher rates of women being incarcerated at this point now. Someone's mother being incarcerated, their parents are addicts, they themselves are addicted to some drugs. So instead of addressing that trauma, instead of hiring counselors, instead of hiring a psychologist, instead of hiring people that can actually help students deal with that trauma, we'd rather hire police officers or go to their home and arrest them. Why don't you go to school? Let me arrest you. Instead of dealing with that trauma. And that's why I critique the system because it creates students as what they call commodities, as things that they can buy and sell, right? You don't come to school, we don't make any money. That's why a lot of people are so adamant for students. That's why there's people calling your house, hey, why didn't you go to school? We need to report you that you're sick or whatever, because we're losing money. That's how I tie the school to prison pipeline to capital. And I mean, you can tie it to policy, political education, but we haven't learned to deal with that trauma that a lot of the students have gone through, especially when it comes to these low-income communities. And harassment happens a lot of the time. And if you're being harassed all the time, like, hey, why aren't you at school? Why aren't you at school? You're going to get tired and be like, fuck, leave me alone. I'm dealing with something at home. I don't want you to harass me no more, right? And it gets tiring. Like, well, you don't want me to be at school? I won't be. Let me drop out then, right? Yeah. So a lot of the times, again, we're not, as educators, a lot of the time they're not trained to deal with the trauma that happens at home.
Yeah. And if I could also, right now we're talking about all of the things that the school system is doing wrong. I also want to highlight something at the middle school where I was a teacher that they were doing right, like something that was working. That was one of the few schools that had a pilot restorative justice program as well. And the students were like peer mediators. And actually one of my students was one of the mediators. So whenever my students had a conflict, like I had the opportunity to send them to the restorative justice classroom and like mediate a conversation instead of calling school police. That school didn't have a police force. They had one security guard and he was kind of like an older dude that like everybody was cool with and, like had like a good relationship with him. And, the vibe was just like different. But it was wonderful, like as a teacher to say, all right, you two kids are having a disagreement. You need to just go in this classroom and talk it out. There was also a situation where two of my kids got into a fight. They got into a fist fight. Like it started in the classroom and then like spilled out into the hallway. And honestly, like I was watching it happen. I was like, these kids are not going to hurt each other. They're two little boys who are mad over whatever they're mad about. I'm going to let it de-escalate. And then I'll send them to the restorative justice room afterwards. But because it ended up spilling out into the hallway, another teacher saw, and then she called security, and they ended up getting sent to the principal's office. And I advocated on behalf of both of them. I was like, look, let's not, suspend them. Let's not, punish them for this. Let's talk to the both of them. And if I can talk to the both of them and get both of them to apologize and promise not to fight each other again, like, can we squash this? Can we work it out? And they let me do it. And the kids did end up apologizing to each other. It was a long and frustrating process because, they're two boys arguing about whatever dumb things little kids argue about. But it worked. And they didn't need to get criminalized. It just took more time and attention. And I just wish that, we would do better in our school system and that, a story like that isn't an outlier. Because I think what happens 9.5 out of 10 times in a situation like that is they call school police, is they call security, and the kids end up getting punished.
Yeah. Yeah. What type of, like, I guess, not interventions, but what type of policies or procedures that would you recommend, Professor Soto? Like, obviously, she talked a little bit about restorative justice. We know how impactful that can be for communities. But how do you see it? Like, how can we start to implement some of these, I guess, ideas that may be novelties to the other communities that aren't dealing with these types of issues? What can we implement?
Well, I always tell my class, and I always tell every time I give also talks that in order to get, especially when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, we must get rid of the prison system. I'm a big push for prison abolition. So if we didn't have a prison system, we wouldn't have the school to prison pipeline because there would be no prisons, right? So we have to stop seeing the prison system as a system of profit. And we have to, again, disinvest in this profit-making prison industrial complex. We might not get rid of it in my lifetime, but there's a large push, especially y'all are in LA area. There's a lot of push against defunding police, against closing prisons, because they're starting to see that prisons aren't working.
Yeah.
Right? Prisons don't work. And it's called CDCR. We put a lowercase r because they say rehabilitation. There's no rehabilitation in the prison system. In reality, a lot of the times they make you what they call a better criminal, but that's a different story. We need to get rid of this global capitalist system that invests a lot in this prison system. When we talk about immigrant detention centers, there's a lot of investment. Different companies, from like AT&T companies, from ankle braces, from building the prison system. There's these major corporations that invest in these prisons. So when we talk about policy change, we need to start investing in our communities. We need to start investing in after-school programs. When you look at after-school programs that have been cut, a lot of the times they're in low-income communities, and a lot of the times these after-school programs were a safe haven for a lot of the poor communities because they had soccer, they had karate, they had different activities for these students. So when you take that away, they go into the community, they go into the barrio, and they see what's happening in the community barrio. They see policing, they see criminalization, and a lot of the times they get kind of like sucked into this lifestyle, right? So if you have like different programs, and that's why I just wrote an article too about you have to reinvest in the community. You have to look for alternatives to the prison system. You have to look at housing, right? When it comes to poverty, I mean, at Echo Park right now, a lot of the homeless people got kicked out of Echo Park. Why? Because they want to make it appeasing to people. They want people to come back to LA. They want people to come back to Echo Park and look at the beautiful. But in reality, there's major in Skid Row in Los Angeles. There's a crisis of homelessness. We're seeing it here in San Diego too. Crisis of homelessness. You have streets and streets full of tents with homeless people. So instead of investing, and we criminalize homelessness, right? Oh, you can't be here. You have a ticket. You have a fine. They're homeless. They don't have money. They don't have a job. How are they going to pay the fine? Oh, you haven't paid the fine. We're going to arrest you.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, for me, that's one of the biggest, because when you talk about prison abolition, that's one of the major kind of like components that is tied to the community. Because when you police the community, so you get people from the community, the school to prison pipeline, gang injunctions, immigration, right? So dismantling the prison system as one of the kind of like the byproducts of the capitalist system is one of my major works in my life's work that I've been working on with not just community members from LA, but community members from here in San Diego. And that will bring a lot of policy change. I know that it's a long shot, but I was in the prison system as well. And I believe in second chances and maybe second, third, fourth, fifth chances. For me, prison abolition is the way to go.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you breaking that down and making that connection there, because that's exactly where, our mindset is, and what we believe in is the abolition of the system that is in place. And you talk about the little r, you've gone through the system, I've gone through the system, and everybody that is connected through IJ or system impacted, whether they were formerly incarcerated or their loved ones are formerly incarcerated. So they have firsthand knowledge about these issues. And as the commander, Taina, likes to point out to folks, those that are closest to the issues are also closest to the solutions. And these are like our methods. And we know that prisons are designed in order to capitalize on capitalism, right? Like they're getting paid $80,000 a year in CDC, Tiny R, to house folks inside. And where is this rehabilitation actually being purported to the public? You know, there's another organization that is going after some of the budget next year, and you know, it's like 0.06% of the budget that is poured into CDC R is actually spent on what they call quote unquote rehabilitation. And we're looking at a $15.4 billion budget, you know, a year here in California. And so when you really start to break down those numbers and you start to look at it just financially, like where can we get folks to kind of, you know, see the bigger picture, see the bigger light of what this system is actually doing for the folks that are, you know, profiteering, or the profit. Yes, that word right there. That are profiting off of our taxpayers and off of us, but then aren't decreasing what they're purporting that they're being able to do. 40 years ago, the recidivism rate was right around 60%. Now it's right around 60%. Yet the budget has gone from 400 million to 15.4 billion. Like, where does this connect, right? I think we can meet people anywhere we want on whether it's statistics, whether it's finances, whether it's trauma, whether it's growth, whether it's getting people to be pro-social or productive members of their community. I think we can find ways to connect any of this, Taina. And I know this has been your big a big passion of yours and a big like push of yours. And you know, you've done great thus far, and I'll push back on Professor Soto. I think we will get it done in our lifetime. He's still a young man, and I think that we're moving in the direction just by having these conversations and starting to show people, you know, these connections, how they connect, how the system is actually run, and how we can actually divest from the system that is in place with CDCR and you know, the educational system, and start to invest in our at promise kids or at promise community members. And so Taina, like with you, like I know I've said a lot. How does that kind of resonate with you? Just having this conversation and being able to have the platform in the arena to be able to talk about the school to prison pipeline and how it connects to abolition.
You know, I actually want to go back to something that you had said, Lee, about, you know, offering our kids a first chance. You know, often we talk about like second and third chances, but, you know, most of us like weren't offered a first chance. Like we were set up for failure, like from the very beginning. Yeah. Like if you listen to like how we've all, you know, talked about our school experiences, we were made to feel like we were criminal from a very young age. Our schools are under-resourced and over-policed. So it's only like a logical conclusion that most of us would end up in the jail or prison system. We often say the system is not broken. It's operating exactly how it was designed to operate. Right. So, you know, in talking about policy change, like you were talking about, Professor Soto, I think basically if we could look at the way our schools are operating now, look at every policy and do the opposite of that, it would probably be like the best way to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. I know like we were all kind of talking about how like we were just met with punishment, like when we were acting up in school. Like, what if instead of, you know, you getting in trouble for playing games in class, like you were asked to be the kid in the class to create the games that the kids were going to play during recess? What if we just like redirected that energy, and instead of being seen as like disruptive, you're like, okay, you're creative. Let's, you know, take this creativity and put this somewhere else. You know, for me, when I was late to school, if somebody had just asked why I was late, I would have said, because I have to wake up really freaking early to catch this bus that only runs once an hour. And the only reason that I'm even going to this school that's so far away from my house is because this is, quote unquote, a better school. Yeah. And, you know, what if someone had reached out and said, okay, well, what do you need? Do you need some more bus tokens? Do you need a ride? Do you need a carpool?
How can we support you?
Or some, you know, like right now we have a system of punishment. We need a system of support. If my family was too poor for us to have a car, for someone to drive me to school, why would they think that I could afford a $250 ticket, you know, as punishment for my crime of arriving to school 20 minutes late? And I think about, you know, the students who I taught, they were all living with some kind of trauma. All of my 16 students, except one, had a loved one who was incarcerated. So they're all surrounded by this system, and they did not receive the support and the resources that they needed to be able to heal from that. So I think, to your point, Professor Soto, like, part of prison abolition is, yes, getting rid of the prisons and the jails so that there's no pipeline of punishment to go into, but also just breaking down like everything that we do. We got to stop calling things detention. We got to stop putting kids on timeout or, punishing them by hitting them. Like, we need to break our addiction to punishment. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It might be like the faster thing. It might be more like self-gratifying in the moment. I've said this on the podcast before, like it satisfies the thirst for revenge, but it doesn't do anything else. And if we really want to like set kids up for success, we need to make sure that they feel loved, that they feel supported, that they feel like, even if they make a mistake, if they cause harm, there's a restorative option and they can make it right instead of getting punished all the time.
Yeah, so we're coming up on the end of our time with Professor Soto this time. Hopefully we can have him back and talk more about it. You did mention an article that you just wrote, and I would love for you to go ahead and drop that or give some closing comments on what you think about prison abolition, the school to prison pipeline, or whatever it is that you feel like that you didn't get to say or that you would like to share with everybody.
Yeah, I actually did just publish an article called Can the Panthers Still Save Us? And that talks about the thin line between co-optation and revolution. So there's a lot of organizations that pretend to do a lot of work for the community, but sadly get co-opted by these major corporations. And that's what the article is about, that there's different movements about prison abolition or reforming the criminal injustice. I call it the criminal injustice system because it's only criminalizing certain populations.
Yeah.
And then there's other movements around structural racism. But then there's billions and billions of dollars being funneled into these social movements that at the same time, they don't want to change the system, but they want to be part of the system. So that's what we call about co-optation, the co-optation process of social movements. And it has to do a lot with prison abolition. There is, like I said, major corporation that it has now become a movement, like a system of funding now. If you don't get funding, then we can't pursue anything. We can't get the people that are in the streets, our activists, paid, right? So a lot of the times these major corporations fund non-threatening movement. Yeah. And while the more radical movements get pushed out. And that's the process of co-optation. So that's what the main the argument is about. And to end with this, we need to, again, start caring about our communities instead of caring about capital. Because in reality, even people from our own race, our own race, get funneled into what the system of capitalism, the system of earning money, right? We've been taught as such being individualistic. When in reality, when we look back in time, we thrive on being a community. That's why the system fears coalition, fears solidarity, feels people getting together, because together we can fuck shit up.
Yeah.
I think the only thought that I would add in wrapping up is to really double down on what you were saying, Professor Soto, about caring for the community, because that's something that all of us can do. Whether or not you're a teacher or, a school administrator or a policymaker, you more than likely interact with kids and youth in your life. So you can reach them with compassion. You can resist the temptation to, punish them for, causing harm. You can support them and surround them with love and let them know that the way that they are is okay, and encourage them to grow up, to reach their full potential. And that's something that any of us can do. And then for those of us who do work in, policy advocacy or, do work in some of these structures, we can do everything that we can to challenge the existing system, change policy, and, create a world that we know is possible, an abolitionist world where we treat people with care and support instead of punishment and revenge. Thank you for listening to Abolition is for Everybody. If you want to continue to support this podcast and our work overall, you can donate to support Initiate Justice at initiatejustice.org/donate.
You've been listening to Abolition is for Everybody, sponsored by Initiate Justice. Be sure to follow us at abolitionis_ on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for regular updates. To support, please rate and comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. Those 5-star ratings help other people find their way to us, so thank you. You can also join us at Abolition Corner on the fourth Tuesday of every month to further your exploration of abolition in a small group. To learn more, please visit initiatejustice.org/abolition-corner.